Mary Barrow had less than a week before her son walked into a job interview with Melvin Stitch, the billionaire CEO who didn't know he was interviewing his own child. 23 years ago, she'd left Melvin's office with a resignation letter in one hand and a positive pregnancy test in her coat pocket. He'd signed her paperwork without looking up. Now Edwin had failed 16 interviews in 9 months, and this 17th one, the one with his father, was the only one where someone finally saw him. Mary could stop it with one phone call. Instead, she wrote a letter she'd been carrying in her heart for 2 decades. Because some truths don't wait for permission. They take their own timing. The rejection email came at 6:02 a.m., and Mary Barrow knew before her son even opened his laptop. She'd learned to read defeat in the set of his shoulders, the way Edwin rubbed his eyes like a man twice his age, 22 years old, brilliant on paper, invisible in every room that mattered. She stood in the kitchen doorway, watching, not speaking. Because mothers who raised sons alone learned early that sometimes silence was the only dignity left. The laptop lid closed with a soft click. Mary poured coffee she knew would go cold, slid the mug across the table, waited. "I had the qualifications," Edwin said finally. His voice was flat, practiced. "I just wasn't what they wanted." Mary wanted to say, "You're exactly what someone wants. But he doesn't know you exist." Instead, she said what she'd said for months. "Something will break your way." Edwin nodded, grateful, hating himself for believing her. 16 interviews, 9 months, different companies, different panels, same outcome. "Too quiet," they said. "Not confident enough. Great culture fit, but," Mary knew the translation, "we don't see you." And the cruelest part? She knew exactly why the world couldn't see him, because she'd raised him to apologize before disagreeing, to pause before speaking, to believe that taking up space required permission. All the survival skills she'd taught him to navigate a world without a father had made him invisible to men who valued volume over thought. Steam rose from their untouched mugs. Morning light cut through the window, making dust visible in the air between them. Everything suspended, everything waiting. But Mary didn't know, couldn't have known, that one more interview was coming, and it would shatter every careful lie she'd built her life around. The notification arrived 3 hours later, while Mary was folding laundry in Edwin's childhood bedroom, the one she'd painted blue before he was born, the one she'd decorated alone. Her phone buzzed. Edwin's message. "Got another interview request? Company called Stitch Global Systems." The basket of clothes slipped through Mary's fingers. Clean shirts tumbled across the floor she wasn't seeing anymore because that name she hadn't spoken aloud in 23 years, was taking up all the air in the room. Stitch Global Systems. Melvin Stitch. Her hands found the edge of the dresser, gripped until her knuckles went white. "Mom? You there?" She stared at her phone, at her son's hope compressed into 3 lines of text. Mary was there, but she was also 23 years in the past, standing in a corner office, resignation letter in one hand, pregnancy test folded in her coat pocket, watching a man choose expansion over explanation. "That's wonderful, baby," she typed back. Her fingers shook. What she didn't type. "That man is your father, and he doesn't know you exist." Mary had worked for Melvin Stitch once, lifetimes ago. Junior analyst, 28 years old, smart enough to notice patterns no one else saw, naive enough to believe that brilliance could coexist with love in a man who measured success in market share. She remembered the night he told her, the words that ended them. "I can't do this and build what I need to build." She'd looked at him across his desk, always his desk, never neutral ground, and said the only thing her pride would allow. "Then build it." She'd left before dawn. He'd never asked why. 2 weeks later, the pregnancy test showed 2 lines. Clear. Undeniable. Mary had stood in her bathroom, hand on her stomach, and made a choice. He'd chosen his empire. She'd choose her child. And she'd never told him, never asked for help, never gave him the chance to choose differently. Because deep in the hollow space where her girlhood dreams had lived, Mary believed she already knew what he'd choose. He always had. Edwin's voice pulled her back to the present. He was standing in the doorway, phone in hand, face bright with something she hadn't seen in months. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. "They want to interview me next week," he said. "Clayton, a mentor from my last internship, pulled strings. He says the CEO sometimes sits in on junior interviews. Guy named Melvin Stitch. Ever heard of him?" Mary's throat closed. She'd heard of him. She'd loved him. She'd left him. And she'd spent 2 decades teaching their son to survive in a world that didn't make room for quiet men, while his father built a fortune teaching other men how to take up all the space. "He's well known," Mary managed. "Very successful. CEOs don't usually interview junior positions." Edwin was pacing now, energized. "But Clayton says Melvin has instincts about people, that he sees things others miss." Mary's heart was breaking and remaking itself simultaneously. Because Melvin did see things. He'd seen her once. Really seen her. And if Edwin walked into that building, if they stood in the same room, if Melvin looked at him the way he used to look at her, the resemblance wasn't subtle. Same height, same jawline, same way of pausing before speaking, like words required exact calibration. "What do you think, Mom?" What did she think? She thought, "I built you alone and loved you completely and feared this moment for 22 years. She thought, "He'll see you. And then what happens to the life I built from silence and sacrifice?" She thought, "What if he sees you and still chooses the empire?" "I think," Mary said carefully, "you should prepare like it's the most important interview of your life." Because it was. Just not for the reasons Edwin thought. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, the same bed she'd slept in alone since Edwin was born, and stared at the ceiling. The past wasn't supposed to resurface like this. Clean, unavoidable, wearing her son's face. She'd made peace with her choices, the jobs she'd taken to keep them fed. The promotions she'd turned down because they required travel, and Edwin had needed her home. The years of explaining to a little boy why his father wasn't there. "He has important work," she'd said, over and over. And Edwin had nodded. Accepted. Internalized. His father's work mattered more than he did. Mary had watched that belief calcify in her son. Watched him learn to make himself smaller, quieter, less demanding. And she'd told herself it was protection, that not knowing Melvin's name meant Edwin couldn't be rejected by him directly. But now the universe had arranged them on a collision course, and Mary had to decide. Did she stop this? Warn Edwin? Call Melvin after 23 years of silence? Or did she let fate, or coincidence, or cosmic justice run its course? Her phone glowed on the nightstand. 2:47 a.m. Mary reached for it, opened her contacts, scrolled to a number she'd never deleted. Melvin Stitch, office line. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she set the phone down. Not yet. Let Edwin have his interview. Let him walk into that building unaware. Let him answer questions and shake hands, and feel, maybe for the first time, what it's like when someone with power actually sees him. And if Melvin recognized something, if DNA whispered across that conference table, well, some truths demanded their own timing. Mary cleaned up the broken ceramic pieces one by one, the way she'd been cleaning up the pieces of this secret for 2 decades. Some of you watching know exactly what that feels like, when the past you buried starts digging itself back up. If this story is hitting close to home, I hope you'll stay with me. There are thousands of women in this community who understand what Mary's carrying. Subscribe if you want to see how she finally sets it down. 6 days. Edwin had 6 days to prepare for an interview at Stitch Global Systems. 6 days before he walked into a building where his father's name was etched in steel above the entrance. 6 days before everything Mary had protected him from, and everything she'd protected herself from, collided in a glass conference room 14 floors above the city. Mary watched her son research the company, watched him practice answers in the bathroom mirror, watched him try on 3 different ties, settling on the blue one she'd given him for his birthday. I have a good feeling about this one, Edwin said the night before. Mary smiled, nodded, said nothing. Because what could she say? That she had a feeling too? That it wasn't good or bad, but inevitable? That some meetings were 22 years in the making and she'd run out of ways to prevent them? The morning of the interview, Edwin left at 7:30 a.m. Mary stood at the window and watched him walk to the bus stop, briefcase in hand, hope in his stride. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Mary Barrow? A woman's voice. Professional. Clipped. Yes? This is Ruth from HR at Stitch Global Systems. We have your number listed as emergency contact for Edwin Barrow. Just confirming this is current. Mary's breath stopped. Emergency contact. Which meant they'd sent Melvin the full file. Which meant, yes, Mary whispered. That's current. The call ended, and Mary knew. Melvin would see her name today. Before the interview. Maybe during it. And 23 years of silence would end not with her confession, but with a paperwork accident. She sat down hard on the couch. The interview was in 2 hours. Melvin would know in less. And Mary? Mary could do nothing but wait for the wreckage she'd been postponing since the day she walked away with their son growing inside her. Some secrets kept you. And some secrets, eventually, inevitably, let you go. Mary hadn't spoken Melvin Stitch's name out loud in 23 years. Hearing her son say it, casually, excitedly, like those syllables didn't carry the weight of her entire adult life, felt like swallowing glass. But Edwin didn't know that. Couldn't know that. He was too busy marveling at his opportunity. Clayton says the CEO rarely interviews junior positions, Edwin said that evening, laptop open on the kitchen table, screen glowing with Stitch Global's website. But Melvin Stitch makes exceptions for people he's curious about. Mary's hand froze mid-motion, coffee pot suspended above her mug. What makes him curious? She asked. Her voice sounded normal. That was a miracle. People who think differently. People who don't fit the mold. People who remind him of himself, Mary thought. She poured coffee she didn't want. Anything to keep her hands occupied. Anything to keep Edwin from seeing the way her face was betraying her. Look at this. Edwin turned the laptop toward her. Forbes magazine. Digital cover. And there he was. Melvin Stitch at 50. Still handsome in that sharp, controlled way. Graying at the temples. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But unmistakably him. Mary's breath caught. Because she wasn't seeing Melvin at 50. She was seeing Edwin at 22. The same bone structure. The same intense gaze. The same slight asymmetry to his smile. How had she convinced herself this wouldn't happen? That they could exist in the same city, breathe the same air, and never collide? He built this from nothing, Edwin was saying, voice bright with admiration. Started in his garage, now it's worth billions. Mary knew. She'd watched from a distance. Every magazine cover, every business feature, every milestone announcement. She'd watched Melvin Stitch become exactly what he'd chosen over her. CEO, innovator, philanthropist, Edwin read. Man, if I could work under someone like that. Mary set down her coffee before her shaking hands spilled it. I'm going to call Clayton, Edwin said. Confirm the details. He left the kitchen, phone already to his ear, voice carrying from the hallway with an enthusiasm she hadn't heard in months. Mary stared at Melvin's face on the screen. He'd aged well. Success looked good on him. But there was something in his eyes, even in a professional photograph, that looked familiar. That looked tired. She closed the laptop before she could read more. Before she could wonder. Before she could remember things she'd worked very hard to forget. The bathroom door locked with a quiet click. Mary gripped the sink, knuckles whitening, and let herself break. Not loudly. Edwin couldn't hear this. But silently. Thoroughly, the way you break when you've been holding yourself together for 2 decades and suddenly realize the structure is failing. She turned on the faucet, let water run to cover any sound she couldn't contain, and stared at her reflection. 49 years old, lines around her mouth from years of not saying what she meant. gray threading through her hair, the face of a woman who'd made impossible choices and lived with them. 23 years. 23 years of silence. And it was ending. Not because she'd chosen to end it, but because the universe had arranged a meeting she couldn't prevent. Unless she stopped it. Unless she told Edwin right now. Unless she called Melvin. Unless she burned down this collision before it happened. Her phone sat on the counter. She could make one call, end this. But what would she say? The son you didn't know you had is about to walk into your building. Don't hire him. It's complicated. No. I left because you chose the company over me. I never told you I was pregnant. Now he's 22 and he thinks you're just a CEO who might give him a chance. Worse. There were no good words for this. No script for confessing a 2-decade lie that had calcified into both their lives. Water ran. Mary cried. And remembered. 23 years ago, Mary had been 28, junior analyst at what would become Stitch Global Systems. Smart, ambitious, naive enough to believe she could have both career and love if she just worked hard enough. Melvin had been 32, driven in a way that felt magnetic. His company was 2 years old, growing fast, consuming every hour of his day. She'd loved him anyway. Or maybe because of it. Maybe she'd loved the intensity, mistaken obsession for passion. They'd dated for 8 months. Coffee at dawn before his investor meetings, dinner at midnight after his product launches. Stolen hours in the gaps of his empire building. Mary had told herself it was enough. Until the night he'd called her into his office, always his office, never neutral ground, and said the words that ended them. I can't do this and build what I need to build. She'd stood there, briefcase still in hand from her own long day, and understood. He was choosing. You're asking me to wait? She'd said. I'm asking you to understand. I understand, Mary had replied. And she had. Perfectly. Painfully. You're picking the company. That's not... It is. And that's fine. You should build it. Her voice had been calm. Pride had kept it that way. But I won't wait for you to finish building before you decide I matter. She'd left before dawn. Resignation letter on his desk. He'd never called. Never asked why. Never came looking. And 2 weeks later, Mary had stood in a drugstore bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines, and made her own choice. He chose. So will I. She chose Edwin. Chose protection over partnership. Chose silence over risk. Because she'd already learned what happened when you asked Melvin Stitch to choose between you and his ambition. You lost. And she wouldn't let their son lose the same way. Now, I need you to understand something about Mary's choice. This wasn't cruelty. This was a woman who'd been told she was too much for a man's ambition. So she became enough for her son instead. Edwin's knock on the bathroom door pulled her back. Mom, you okay? Mary turned off the water, dried her face, practiced her expression in the mirror. Fine, baby, just washing up. When she opened the door, Edwin was smiling, phone in hand. Hope radiating from him like heat. Interviews confirmed. Next Thursday, 10 a.m. Clayton says I should prepare like it's the biggest opportunity of my life. It is, Mary thought. Just not the way you think. That's wonderful, she said. The lie came easily. She'd had 22 years of practice. That night, Mary couldn't stop herself. She opened her laptop, searched Melvin's name, read things she'd avoided reading for years. Business profiles, success stories, interviews where he talked about sacrifice and vision and the price of building something that mattered. Never once did he mention what he'd sacrificed, who he'd left behind. One article from 5 years ago caught her eye. Stitch admits his personal life took a back seat to professional success. I built something extraordinary, he says, but I built it alone. I'm not sure that's the victory I thought it would be. Mary closed the laptop. Too late for regrets. Too late for what-ifs. What Mary didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Melvin had looked for her. Not immediately. Not while the wound was fresh. But later. Years later. When the company had stabilized and the silence in his penthouse felt louder than his success. He'd hired someone to find her. Learned she'd left the city. Had a child. Built a quiet life far from his world. And he'd respected that distance. Told himself she was better off. But he'd kept one thing. A photograph. Mary at 28, laughing at something he'd said. Hand on her stomach she didn't know he'd noticed. Sunlight in her hair. He'd kept it in a locked drawer in his office. Looked at it sometimes when meetings ran late and the building emptied, and he wondered what she'd been trying to tell him that last day. He'd never figured it out. Until Thursday. Until a file landed on his desk with a name that stopped his heart. 6 days. Edwin had 6 days to prepare for a job interview. Mary had 6 days to decide if she'd let fate run its course or intervene. She watched her son research answers, practice his handshake, iron his shirt 3 times to get the creases right. "I won't mess this up," Edwin said the night before. "You couldn't if you tried," Mary replied. Because he was walking in there as himself, brilliant, uncertain, achingly sincere. And if Melvin saw him, really saw him, he'd recognize more than talent. He'd recognize the son he didn't know he'd lost. That Forbes photo Edwin kept pulling up, and Melvin would see it later in Edwin's bag and recognize where his son learned to dream. The question Edwin would ask in that interview, it would stop Melvin's heart. The interview was supposed to be symbolic. It would become seismic. Mary made her decision standing in that bathroom at 3 a.m., staring at her reflection, water running to cover the sound of her finally letting go. She wouldn't stop the interview. She wouldn't call Melvin. She wouldn't warn Edwin. Let them meet. Let DNA whisper across that conference table. Let Melvin see what he'd missed while building his empire. But she would do one thing. Mary pulled out paper and pen, old-fashioned, deliberate, and began to write the letter she should have sent 23 years ago. Dear Melvin, by the time you read this, you'll know. The emergency contact form, the resemblance, the math, it all adds up to the son you didn't know you had. I didn't tell you. That was my choice. You chose your company. I chose our child. We both got what we wanted, except now Edwin is walking into your building and I can't stop it. He doesn't know. I never told him your name. I let him believe his father had important work. I was protecting him, or protecting myself. I don't know anymore. If you see him, really see him, you'll recognize yourself. The way he pauses before speaking. The way he sees patterns. The way he apologizes for being brilliant. That's what happens when you raise a child to believe his father thought the work mattered more. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not even sure why I'm writing this. Maybe because 23 years of silence should end with words, not accidents. He earned that interview. Whatever happens next, he earned it. Mary. She sealed the envelope, addressed it, put it in her purse, just in case everything fell apart. Edwin would walk into that building Thursday morning. Melvin would see a file with Mary's name, and a 23-year lie would finally run out of time. Some truths demanded their own timing. This one had waited long enough. The collision was 6 days away, and none of them were ready. Edwin's hands were shaking when he signed in at reception. 2 floors above him, Melvin Stitch was about to walk into a meeting he'd later call fate. The lobby of Stitch Global Systems was all glass and steel and intimidation. Edwin adjusted his tie for the 3rd time. Still crooked. His reflection in the polished elevator doors showed a man trying very hard to look like he belonged. He didn't feel like he belonged. 14 floors up, the elevator opened onto more glass, more steel, a reception area where even the plants looked expensive. Edwin Barrow, he told the woman at the desk. I have a 10 a.m. interview. She smiled. Professional. Practiced. Conference room C. They're ready for you. Edwin's heart was hammering. He'd prepared for 3 days straight. Researched the company. Memorized answers. Practiced his handshake until it felt natural. None of it felt natural now. The conference room was glass on 3 sides. City visible 14 floors below. 3 interviewers already seated. Laptops open. Expressions neutral. Edwin sat. Smiled. Tried to project confidence he didn't feel. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Barrow, the lead interviewer said. Woman. 40s. Sharp suit. Sharper eyes. Let's begin. It started badly. The first question was straightforward. Edwin's answer wasn't. He fumbled, lost his thread, apologized mid-sentence. The interviewer's eyes glazed. That familiar shift. The moment they stopped listening and started ending. Edwin had seen it 16 times before. He was watching it happen again. One interviewer checked her phone. Another glanced at the clock. Edwin's chest tightened. Not again, please, not again. Then the door opened, and everything changed. Melvin Stitch walked in late, jacket still on, eyes scanning the room with habitual authority. I'll sit in, he said, not asking, stating. The interviewer straightened, laptops forgotten, and Edwin froze, because something about the man unsettled him. Not fear, not awe, but a strange sense of recognition he couldn't place. Melvin was tall, Edwin's height exactly, same build, same way of moving through space like he was measuring it. Their eyes met. Edwin felt it. Something unspoken. Something familiar. Melvin settled into the chair at the head of the table. Cedar cologne and something sharp. Expensive watch. Hands that looked like they'd built things. Hands that held a pen the exact way Edwin held his. Carry on, Melvin said, but his eyes stayed on Edwin. Not scanning. Focused. Searching. The lead interviewer repeated the question. Data optimization. Edwin's approach. Edwin started again. Better this time. More focused. But halfway through, he fumbled again. Lost confidence. The words dried up. I'm sorry, Edwin started. Start over, Melvin interrupted. His voice was quiet. Firm. Slower. Edwin blinked. Looked up. Met Melvin's eyes. No one had ever given him a second chance in an interview. No one had ever told him to try again. Something clicked. I'd ask why we're optimizing first, Edwin said. Slower. Steadier. Systems built without purpose fail beautifully. You can make something efficient that's solving the wrong problem. Melvin leaned forward, not back. Forward. Say that again, he said, recognition flickering across his face. Edwin repeated it, expanded on it, and for the first time in 17 interviews, he wasn't apologizing for being smart. He was explaining, teaching, showing how he thought. The other interviewers were typing now, engaged. But Melvin wasn't typing. He was watching. The way Edwin paused before disagreeing with a premise, the way his hands moved when explaining complex ideas, the way he tilted his head when thinking, like the angle helped thoughts settle into place. Melvin told himself it was talent recognition, sharp instincts, the thing that made him good at finding people others overlooked. But deeper, in a place he couldn't name yet, DNA was whispering. Edwin performed better than he ever had, not because the questions were easier, but because someone in that room was actually listening. Melvin asked questions the others didn't, not about skills, about thinking. Why does this system exist? Melvin asked about a process Edwin had critiqued. Edwin paused, considered. I think someone built it to solve a problem that doesn't exist anymore, but no one questioned it because it works well enough. And what would you do? Ask what problem we're actually trying to solve now, then build toward that. Melvin smiled. Brief, almost hidden. That used to be my answer. The comment hung in the air. Strange. Weighted. Edwin didn't understand why this man's approval felt so essential, why his presence made everything sharper, clearer, like Edwin was finally performing at the level he'd always known he was capable of. The interview ended 40 minutes later. The lead interviewer stood. Thank you, Mr. Barrow. We'll be in touch. Edwin gathered his papers, hands steadier now, hope replacing dread. Melvin stayed seated, watching. Something complicated crossing his face. The jawline. The eyes. The way Edwin apologized before leaving, like taking up space, required permission. It was like watching himself at 22. Brilliant, but uncertain. Capable, but invisible. Except this wasn't just pattern recognition. This was something else entirely. Melvin caught Edwin in the hallway before the elevator. "Mr. Barrow, wait." Edwin turned. Surprised, Melvin extended his hand. "You did well in there." "Thank you, sir." Edwin's handshake was firm, practiced, exactly like Melvin's used to be. "Where did you study?" Melvin asked. Casual, but his pulse was racing. Edwin answered, then added, "My mother couldn't afford the bigger schools, but she made sure I got the best education she could manage." "Your mother raised you alone?" Edwin nodded. "Since I was born. She's everything." Something shifted in Melvin's face. Something painful he tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. "She taught you to think like this?" "She taught me to question everything, especially systems that don't make sense." Melvin's throat tightened. Because he knew that lesson. He'd learned it building companies. And somewhere, a woman he'd walked away from had taught the same lesson to a son who... No, it couldn't be. "What's your mother's name?" Melvin asked. Too quickly. Too intensely. Edwin's expression shifted. Confused. "Mary. Mary Barrow." The hallway tilted. Mary. 23 years of silence collapsed into one name. Melvin's hand tightened on the file folder he was holding. Ruth from HR had given it to him before the interview. He hadn't opened it yet. Hadn't needed to. Until now. "We'll be in touch," Melvin managed. His voice sounded far away. Edwin smiled. Genuine. Hopeful. "Thank you for the second chance. No one's ever done that before." He walked to the elevator, pressed the button, disappeared behind closing doors, and Melvin stood in the hallway, file folder in hand, world rearranging itself around him. He opened the file with shaking fingers. Emergency contact, Mary Barrow. Date of birth, 22 years, 5 months ago. The math was simple, devastating, undeniable. Melvin pulled out his phone, went to his office, locked the door. Then he opened the locked drawer in his desk, the one with the photograph he'd kept for 23 years, Mary at 28, laughing, hand on her stomach. He'd thought she was just cold, or nervous, or... Oh God, she'd been trying to tell him, and he'd been too busy, too focused, too certain that what he was building mattered more than what he was losing. Melvin asked HR for Edwin's file before the interview ended. What he saw in it unraveled him. Edwin called Mary from the lobby, voice bright with something she hadn't heard in months. Hope. "Mom, he saw me. The CEO actually sat in on my interview and he saw me." Mary was standing in her kitchen. Letter to Melvin still in her purse. Heart breaking in real time. "That's wonderful, baby. He asked about you. About who taught me to think like this." Mary's hand found the counter. Gripped. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you raised me. That you're everything." Mary closed her eyes. Tears she wouldn't let him hear. "I'm proud of you, Edwin. I think I might actually get this, Mom. I think finally someone sees me." "He does," Mary whispered. "He absolutely does." Edwin walked out hopeful. Mary was about to receive a call that would confirm her worst fear. Because 2 floors above where Edwin had interviewed, Melvin Stitch sat in his office, staring at a photograph and a file folder, understanding finally crashing through him. The interview ended. The revelation was just beginning. What happened in the hallway would haunt both of them, but what happened next would change all 3 of their lives. Do you remember the first time someone really saw you? Not what you could do for them, but who you actually were? That's what Edwin felt walking out of that building. And if you're watching this because you know what it's like to be overlooked, to have to prove yourself again and again, I see you. This community sees you. Hit that like button if you felt that moment with Edwin. Because what happens next? He's going to need that feeling to survive it. Melvin had Edwin's file. He had Mary's name. He had the math. And within hours, he'd have the truth that Mary had protected for 23 years. The collision had happened. Quietly, in a glass conference room 14 floors above the city, and none of them would ever be the same. Ruth from HR knocked on Melvin's door at 4:47 p.m. with Edwin Barrow's file. By 4:52, Melvin's hands were shaking so badly he had to set down his glass. The file was routine. Standard post-interview documentation, background check, references, emergency contact information. Melvin had opened 1,000 of these files, maybe more. This one detonated his entire life. Emergency contact, Mary Barrow. The name hit him like a physical blow. Mary. Melvin's entire body went rigid. The file slipped from his fingers, papers scattering across his mahogany desk. Mary Barrow. He hadn't seen that name in 23 years, hadn't spoken it, had tried very hard not to think it. And now it was here, on official paperwork, connected to a young man who, it couldn't be. Melvin's hands scrambled for the papers. Found Edwin's date of birth. 22 years, 7 months ago. The math was simple. Brutal, undeniable. Mary had left 23 years ago, resigned without explanation, vanished before he could ask why. And 7 months later, she'd had a child. His child. Melvin's breathing went shallow, uneven. The office walls seemed to close in. "It's a coincidence," he whispered to the empty room. But he didn't believe it, because he'd spent an hour watching Edwin Barrow in that interview room, watching the way he paused before speaking, the way he apologized before disagreeing, the way he held his pen, the jawline, the eyes, the way Edwin tilted his head when thinking. That wasn't coincidence. That was DNA. "That's me," Melvin breathed. "Oh God, that's me." The building emptied around him. 6 p.m., 7, 8. Melvin sat in his office, door locked, lights dimmed, amber glow from the Venetian blinds painting everything in sunset colors. He'd pulled the old personnel files, 23 years archived. Dusty, almost forgotten. Mary Barrow, junior analyst, hired, promoted, resigned without notice. The dates lined up, perfectly, painfully. She'd left in February. Edwin was born in September. She'd been pregnant, and she'd never told him. "I have a son who doesn't know me," Melvin said to the silence. The grief crashed through him then. 22 years of birthdays he'd missed, first words he hadn't heard, graduations he hadn't attended, a lifetime of moments that had happened without him, because Mary hadn't told him. Anger flared, hot and immediate. "She never told me," Melvin said, voice rising. 23 years, and she never... But the anger died as quickly as it came, because Mary had tried to tell him. He remembered now. The way she'd stood in his office doorway that last day, resignation letter in hand, something urgent in her eyes. He'd been on a call, waved her in, signed her paperwork without looking up. She'd waited. He'd kept talking. She'd left. "I never asked why she left," Melvin whispered. Understanding settled like weight in his chest. This wasn't something that had happened to him. This was something he'd caused. The photograph was where it had always been. Locked drawer, bottom right, hidden but not forgotten. Melvin's hands shook as he pulled it out. Mary at 28, younger than he'd let himself remember. Wind in her hair, catching it mid-motion. Sunlight making her glow, laughing at something he'd said. And her hand, resting on her stomach. Protective, unconscious, tender. Melvin had taken this photo on a Sunday morning, rare day off. They'd gone to the park because Mary had insisted he needed air, needed to stop thinking about the company for 5 minutes. She'd been radiant, terrified, trying to tell him something. He'd been too distracted to notice. Phone buzzing, investor meeting in 2 hours, mind already halfway back to the office. He'd kissed her forehead, promised to be present, lied without meaning to. She was gone before he got back from that meeting. Melvin stared at the photograph now, at Mary's hand on her stomach, at the secret she'd been carrying that he'd been too blind to see. The photo was bent at the corner from being held too many times, over too many years. Evidence that he'd kept her, not in his life, but in this small, hidden way. He'd looked for her half-heartedly after she left, asked around, heard she'd moved, told himself it was better this way, that she deserved someone less consumed by ambition. He'd kept the photo anyway, because even then, especially then, he'd known he'd made the wrong choice. But he'd been too proud to chase her, too convinced that what he was building mattered more. Now, 23 years later, Melvin understood what he'd actually built. A fortune, a legacy, an empire, and a canyon between himself and the only things that had ever truly mattered. Melvin called Mary's number at 9:47 p.m. His hands were still shaking. Her number pulled from Edwin's emergency contact form, a violation of privacy he couldn't bring himself to care about. The phone rang once, twice. Mary answered on the third ring. "Hello?" Her voice. After 23 years. Older, wearier, unmistakable. Melvin's throat closed. He couldn't speak. "Melvin?" Not a question, a statement, resigned, like she'd been expecting this call for 2 decades. "When were you going to tell me?" The words came out harsh, accusatory. "When were you going to ask?" Mary's response was immediate, practiced. A retort she'd clearly rehearsed. Silence stretched between them, decades of it compressed into seconds. "He's my son," Melvin said finally. "Yes. You never told me." "You never looked up from your desk long enough to notice I was pregnant?" The words landed like blows. True. Devastating. "I would have," Melvin started. "What? Chosen differently?" Mary's laugh was bitter. "You'd already chosen, Melvin. I was just accepting your decision. That wasn't your choice to make. Neither was leaving. But you made that choice for me when you chose the company over everything else." Melvin stood, paced. His office felt too small for this conversation. "He's 22 years old, Mary. I missed everything." "I know. You kept him from me. I kept him safe." Mary's voice cracked, first sign of emotion. "I kept him safe from a father who would have taught him he wasn't worth showing up for." The accusation hung between them. Painful. Probably true. "I want to meet him," Melvin said. "Properly. I want to tell him. No. He has a right to know. He has a right to be told gently, by both of us, together." Mary's voice steadied, taking control. "Not in your office, not as damage control. If we do this, we do it right." "When?" "After you make the hiring decision. He deserves to know if he got the job on his own merit." Melvin's jaw tightened. "He earned that position." "Did he? Or are you already thinking of him as your son instead of as a candidate?" Melvin had no answer. Because she was right. The interview had shifted the second he'd seen Edwin's mannerisms, his face, his brilliant, uncertain mind. "We need to meet first," Mary said. "You and me, before we tell him. We need to agree on how this happens." "Where?" Mary named a cafe. "Neutral territory. Public. Safe. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I'll be there." Mary was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Melvin?" "Yes?" "He's a good man. I raised a good man. You don't get credit for that." The line went dead. Melvin stood in his office, phone still pressed to his ear, understanding settling like grief. She was right, about all of it. He'd built an empire and missed a son, made millions and lost the only thing that couldn't be bought back: time. 22 years of it. Gone. Irretrievable. The board would find out about Edwin within days. Their reaction would force Melvin into an impossible choice. But that was tomorrow's crisis. Tonight, Melvin had to face what he'd done, what he'd lost, what he might never get back. The job offer was already drafted. Melvin pulled it up on his computer. Standard language, competitive salary, fast-track program. He stared at it for an hour, then rewrote it entirely. Not because Edwin was his son, but because Edwin had earned something more than standard. He'd earned recognition, mentorship, a chance to build something that mattered. The things Melvin should have given him 22 years ago. Edwin checked his email 14 times that night. He had no idea his entire life was about to change. He went to bed hopeful, dreaming of job offers and new beginnings. Mary went to bed terrified, knowing the collision she'd postponed for 23 years was finally happening. And Melvin sat alone in his office until 2 a.m., staring at that photograph. He'd built a fortune, a legacy, an empire that would outlive him, and missed the only thing that mattered: the son who had his eyes, his mind, his way of seeing the world, the son who thought his father hadn't wanted him. Melvin thought he was ready for the truth. He wasn't ready for what Mary had endured, for the weight of her choices, for the reckoning that was coming. But ready or not, tomorrow he'd face her. And somehow, they'd have to figure out how to tell Edwin that his entire life had been built on a silence that was finally breaking. The file had revealed everything, and nothing would ever be the same. Mary arrived at the cafe first, chose the table in the corner, and prepared to face the man who'd chosen everything else over her. 10 a.m. Morning rush. The noise of espresso machines and casual conversations insulated them. She'd chosen this place deliberately. Public. Neutral. No history. She ordered coffee she wouldn't drink, sat with her back to the wall, hands steady around the ceramic mug. 23 years. And it had come to this. Melvin arrived at 10:07. Late, even now. Some patterns never changed. He was older. Graying at the temples. Lines around his eyes from decades of squinting at spreadsheets and market forecasts. But still formidable. Still the kind of man who walked into rooms expecting them to rearrange around him. Mary didn't stand. Didn't smile. Didn't pretend this was anything but what it was, a reckoning. Melvin sat across from her. The space between them was 3 feet. It felt like 23 years compressed into physical distance. His hands were unsteady as he reached for the menu, then abandoned it. Mary. Melvin. Outside, rain started. Soft at first, then harder, blurring the windows, making the world beyond their table disappear. You look well, he said. Don't. Mary's voice was calm, final. We're not doing small talk. Melvin nodded, swallowed whatever pleasantry he'd been preparing. Why didn't you tell me? The question he'd carried all night. All 23 years, if he was honest. Mary looked at him. Really looked. At the man she'd loved when she was young and naive enough to believe ambition and partnership could coexist. You told me you didn't have room for anything except your ambition, she said. Unflinching. I believed you. I would have, what, chosen differently? Mary's laugh was sharp. Brief. You already chose, Melvin. The words landed. Stayed. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is that I had to make an impossible choice because you'd already made yours. Mary leaned forward. I was pregnant. Terrified. And you were so busy building your empire you didn't notice. I didn't know. Because you didn't look. I tried to tell you, Melvin. 3 times. His face changed. When? The first time? I brought you lunch at the office. You were on a conference call. Waved me in. Ate while talking. I sat there for 45 minutes waiting for you to hang up. You never did. I left the empty containers and went home. Melvin's hands flattened on the table. The second time I asked you to dinner. Somewhere nice. I needed to talk, I said. You showed up an hour late, took 3 calls during appetizers. I couldn't find the words between your interruptions. Mary, the third time, I stood in your office doorway, resignation letter in hand, pregnancy test in my coat pocket. You signed my paperwork without looking up. The memory crashed through Melvin. He remembered that. The phone call. The urgency of whatever deal he'd been closing. Mary standing there, waiting. Him dismissing her with a signature. You didn't give me a choice, he said weakly. Mary's eyes blazed. I gave you 9 months of clues. You were too busy to notice. Silence. The cafe noise filled it. Rain on windows, lives continuing around them. He failed 16 interviews, Melvin said finally. Mary's expression softened. Barely. but enough. I know. Why? Because the world doesn't make space for quiet men, and you weren't there to teach him how to take it anyway. The accusation hit its mark. What did you tell him? About me? Mary took a breath. This part cost her. I told him you had important work to do. Melvin's face crumbled. Every time he asked why his father wasn't there, that's what I said. You had important work. You were building something that mattered. You were busy. Mary. And you know what he learned, Melvin? He learned that he wasn't important enough to keep. That work mattered more than he did. That taking up space required permission. The weight of it settled. 22 years of a child internalizing his father's absence as personal failure. I didn't know, Melvin whispered. You didn't ask. Mary's testimony came in pieces, each one landing like evidence in a trial Melvin was losing. She told him about the jobs she'd taken, administrative assistant, receptionist, work that paid bills but required nothing of her after 5 p.m. because Edwin needed her home. She told him about the promotions she'd turned down, the ones that required travel, relocation, the kind of ambition she'd had before she'd chosen motherhood over partnership. I could have been a director, Mary said. I had the skills, the vision. But every opportunity required something I couldn't give because I was raising our son alone. I would have helped. With what? Money? You think that's what he needed? Mary's voice rose. First time. He needed a father who showed up, who taught him he mattered, who modeled what it looks like when a man chooses his family. Melvin had no defense, no response, because she was right about everything. The nights he asked about you were the worst, Mary continued, voice softer now, more painful. I'd tuck him in, and he'd ask why you didn't want to meet him, as if he'd done something wrong, as if he wasn't enough. What did you say? I lied. I said you didn't know about him, that if you did, you'd love him. Mary's eyes filled. She blinked it back. But I wasn't sure. And I couldn't risk you proving me wrong. Melvin reached across the table. Mary pulled back. You don't get to comfort me. You don't get to make this easier for yourself. His hand retreated. I'm sorry, he said. Inadequate, but true. Your apology doesn't change what I sacrificed, doesn't give me back the career I lost, doesn't repair the damage done to a child who thought he wasn't worth his father's time. Let me fix it. You can't fix 22 years, Melvin. Let me try. Let me be there now. Mary studied him, the man across from her, still ambitious, still driven. But something else now, something that looked like regret. That's not your decision, she said finally. It's his. I want you to sit with something for a moment. Mary didn't keep this secret out of spite. She kept it because she'd learned that a woman's truth gets weaponized, that vulnerability gets punished. How many of you learned that lesson the same way she did? They talked for 2 hours, hashing out terms like a negotiation. Because that's what it was. Mary's conditions were clear. They'd tell Edwin together, not separately, not with lawyers, together. After he got the job offer, he deserved to know he'd earned it on merit. Melvin would not use money or power to fix this. No trust funds, no shortcuts, no buying his way into fatherhood. You don't get to be his father just because DNA says so, Mary said. You earn it. Melvin nodded. Accepted. When? He asked. After the job offer comes through. We'll arrange dinner, somewhere private. We'll tell him then. What if he hates me? He will. For a while. Mary's honesty was brutal. But maybe if you show up every day after that, he'll hate you less. And you? What about me? Do you hate me? Mary considered. Rain had stopped, sunlight breaking through clouds. I did. For a long time, but hatred is exhausting. Now I just wish you'd been different, wish we'd been different. We could have been good, Melvin said. We were never going to be good. You wanted an empire. I wanted a partner. Those things don't coexist. The unspoken truth hung between them, They both still recognized each other. The people they'd been, the potential they'd had, the life they'd never built. But recognition wasn't reconciliation. It was just memory. Proof they'd existed together once, before choices fractured them into separate lives. Mary left that cafe thinking she'd controlled the narrative. She hadn't. Because someone at Stitch Global had already noticed the resemblance. Margaret Chen, board member. Sharp eyes, sharper instincts. She'd seen Edwin in the hallway, seen Melvin watching him, seen something that didn't add up, and she had plans. The board meeting was in 3 days. If they discovered Edwin before Melvin told him, the fallout would be nuclear. Melvin made a promise to Mary. The board was about to force him to break it. The job offer arrived in Edwin's inbox at 6:00 a.m. the next morning. By 6:03, he'd called his mother crying with joy. "Mom, I got it. I actually got it." Mary held the phone to her ear, tears streaming down her face, pride and terror warring inside her. "I'm so proud of you, baby." "He saw me. Someone finally saw me." "He did," Mary whispered. "He absolutely did." By noon, Melvin's board would have Edwin's personnel file. By 5:00 p.m., everything Mary and Melvin agreed to would shatter. Edwin woke that morning thinking about his job interview. He should have been thinking about his entire identity, because 3 lives were about to collide. And the careful plan Mary and Melvin had made was about to be destroyed by forces neither of them controlled. The truth was coming. Not gently, not planned, but violently, publicly, in exactly the way they'd tried to prevent. The meeting was over, the agreement made, the plan set. But plans only work when everyone follows them. And Margaret Chen had different ideas entirely. Edwin read the offer letter 3 times, certain he'd misunderstood. This wasn't entry level. This was destiny, fast-track program, direct mentorship under the CEO. Salary that made his hands shake as he held the paper. Benefits that looked like they'd been designed for someone with a decade more experience. "They see me," Edwin whispered to his empty apartment. "They actually see me." He called Mary at 6:03 a.m., too excited to care about the hour. "Mom, I got it." Mary was already awake, had been since midnight, unable to sleep, knowing this call was coming. "Baby, that's wonderful." She forced brightness into her voice, pride and terror in equal measure. "Did you read the salary?" "Mom, I can help with the mortgage. I can actually help you." "Baby, you don't need to. Let me, please. Let me finally help you." Mary closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face that Edwin couldn't hear through the phone. "I'm so proud of you," she managed. And she was, devastatingly proud. Because her son had earned this, had survived 16 rejections and kept trying, had walked into that building and shown them exactly who he was. But the pride was tangled with dread. Because in 3 days, she and Melvin were supposed to tell him the truth. Supposed to sit him down and explain that his father had been there all along. That the CEO who'd seen him was the man who'd never known to look. 3 days. They had 3 days to do this right. They didn't even have 3 hours. Margaret Chen arrived at Stitch Global at 7:30 a.m. Board member. 15 years with the company. Sharp instincts that had saved them from 3 disasters and identified countless opportunities. Those same instincts were screaming now. She'd seen Edwin Barrow in the hallway after his interview. Watched Melvin watch him. Noticed something in the CEO's expression she'd never seen before. Recognition. And something deeper. Something that looked like grief. Margaret pulled up Edwin's file, then pulled archived photos of Melvin from 20 years ago. Marketing materials, press releases, company anniversaries. She laid them side by side on her desk. The resemblance wasn't subtle. Same bone structure, same eyes, same intensity even in casual photographs. Margaret pulled Edwin's emergency contact information. Mary Barrow. She searched the name in the company database. Personnel files from 23 years ago. Mary Barrow, junior analyst. Resigned without notice. Margaret did the math. Edwin's age, Mary's departure date, the timeline that made everything clear. "Oh, Melvin," she said to her empty office. "What have you done?" The boardroom was leather and mahogany, and power concentrated in one space. Margaret called the emergency meeting for noon. Only senior board members. Only people who needed to know. Melvin walked in expecting routine business, saw their faces, understood immediately. "We have a problem," Margaret said. No preamble, no politeness. She slid the photographs across the table. Young Melvin, current Edwin, side by side. Undeniable. "When were you planning to tell us?" Melvin's jaw clenched, control slipping. 5 days. "And the mother is none of your concern." Margaret's expression hardened. "Everything that affects this company is my concern. You've created a liability." "I found my son." The words landed in the room. Heavy. Final. "Then choose," Margaret said. "The company or the conflict?" Melvin stood. "He earned that position. The interview panel didn't know. I barely participated. He got that job on merit." "That's not how the shareholders will see it." Margaret's voice was level, factual. "They'll see nepotism, favoritism, a CEO using company resources to benefit his secret child." "He's not secret. I just found out." "Irrelevant. The optics are disastrous. You step aside or he doesn't start. Those are your options." Another board member spoke. Older man, usually sympathetic. "Melvin, we're not trying to hurt you, but you've put us in an impossible position." "He starts Monday," Melvin said. "Not if you're still CEO," Margaret replied. "Conflict of interest, legal liability. We can't allow it." Melvin looked around the table, saw the calculation in their faces. They weren't being cruel. They were being practical. And that made it worse. Melvin called Mary from his car at 2:47 p.m., voice breaking. "They know." Mary's response was immediate. "How fast can we tell him?" "It's worse. They want him out, or they want me out." Silence. Then you get out. "If I leave, the board will retaliate. They'll blacklist him." "Then you fight, and I don't care what it costs you." "Mary, you don't get to fail him twice, Melvin. You don't get to let him think he didn't earn this because you're too cowardly to face consequences." "I'm trying to protect him." "You're trying to protect your position. There's a difference." The line went dead. Melvin sat in his car, in the parking garage he'd built, in the company he'd created, and understood that everything he'd accumulated meant nothing if he lost this chance. If he told Edwin now, it looked like damage control, like he'd hired his son and got caught. If he waited, the board might force Edwin out before he even started. If he stepped aside, he lost the power to protect Edwin. If he fought the board, he risked destroying the company. There were no good choices, only impossible ones, the kind Mary had faced 23 years ago. Alone, without his help. Edwin started his first day at 9:00 a.m. Monday morning. He wore his best suit, the one Mary had helped him pick out 3 years ago. The one he'd worn to 16 failed interviews before this one succeeded. His team welcomed him. 12 people, all older, all watching the new hire who'd somehow landed in their department with CEO backing. Melvin doesn't usually take personal interest in junior hires, someone mentioned casually. "You must have impressed him." Edwin felt pride, not suspicion. "I got lucky," he said. "Right place, right time." But it wasn't luck, and it wasn't timing. It was DNA whispering across a conference room table. Father recognizing son, a collision 22 years overdue. Edwin met his responsibilities with focused intensity, answered questions, contributed ideas, proved within hours that he belonged there. 14 floors above, Melvin watched from his office window, watched his son navigate his first day, watched him earn the respect Melvin couldn't protect. Time was running out. The board meeting was tomorrow. Margaret had one more card to play, and Melvin knew what it was. She'd tell Edwin first. Use the truth as a weapon. Make it seem like manipulation instead of fate. Edwin would find out the truth in the worst possible way. And it would come from someone who wanted to hurt him, unless Melvin stopped it. That night, Melvin made a decision. It would cost him everything he'd built, and save the one thing he'd lost. He drafted his resignation letter at 11:47 p.m. 1 page. Simple. Final. To the Board of Stitch Global Systems. Effective immediately. I am resigning as CEO. I've built this company over 23 years. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, but I've recently learned that some things matter more than markets and mergers. I have a son. I didn't know he existed until last week. He earned his position here without my influence. He deserves the chance to build his career without my complications. I'm stepping aside so he can stay. Choose my replacement wisely. This company deserves leadership that understands what I'm only now learning. Legacy isn't what you build. It's who you choose. Melvin Stitch. He read it 7 times, then sealed it. Put it in his briefcase. Tomorrow, he'd walk into that board meeting and end his career. For a son who didn't know him. For a chance at redemption he might never get. Edwin's first day would also be his last. Unless Melvin did the unthinkable. The board meeting was in 24 hours. What happened there would devastate 3 lives. You know what breaks my heart about this moment? Melvin's about to lose everything because he's finally choosing right. How many of us learned too late what really matters? If you've ever had to choose between what you built and who you love, drop a comment. I want to hear your story. Because Edwin's about to learn that success sometimes costs everything. And sometimes that's the price of becoming whole. Melvin stood in his office that night, looking at the empire he'd built. Corner office, city lights below, awards lining the walls, Forbes covers framed like achievement. Then he looked at the photograph. Mary, young and pregnant and trusting. The secret she'd carried. The choice she'd made alone. And he finally understood what mattered. Not the company, not the legacy, not the empire that would continue without him, but the son who had his eyes, his mind, his way of seeing patterns no one else noticed. The son who thought he'd earned his position, who didn't know his father had been there all along. Tomorrow, Melvin would walk away from everything he'd built, and toward the one thing that couldn't be bought, replaced or rebuilt, a chance, just a chance, at being the father he should have been 22 years ago. The resignation letter sat in his briefcase, ready, waiting. Edwin slept peacefully that night, dreaming of his future. Mary lay awake, knowing the truth was coming. And Melvin prepared to lose everything to gain the only thing that ever really mattered. The ultimatum had been delivered. The choice had been made. And tomorrow, 3 lives would collide in ways none of them were prepared for. Edwin was in a team meeting when his phone buzzed with a message that would crack his world in half. He glanced at the screen. Email. Subject line, "You deserve to know." Anonymous sender. Edwin almost deleted it. Spam, phishing, the usual digital noise. But something made him open it. Dear Mr. Barrow, you should know the truth about your hiring. The CEO is your biological father. See attached photos for proof. Your mother worked here 23 years ago. Do the math. Thought you deserved to know you didn't earn this position. You inherited it. Attached. 2 photographs, side by side. Young Melvin Stitch. Company archives. 25 years old. Sharp suit, intense eyes, and Edwin's face staring back at him. The room tilted. Sound muted. His team kept talking, but Edwin couldn't hear them anymore. Because he was looking at himself. His exact face. Just older. Different decade. Same person. His phone slipped from his hands. Clattered on the conference table. You okay? Someone asked. Edwin stood, chair scraping, hands shaking. Excuse me. He walked out, down the hallway, toward the elevator. Each step mechanical, automatic. His breathing got faster as the elevator climbed. 14 floors. Each one bringing him closer to answers he suddenly knew would destroy him. The math was simple, devastating. His mother, Melvin Stitch, 23 years ago. The interview that felt like fate. The CEO who'd seen him. It wasn't talent. It wasn't merit. It was DNA. Edwin didn't knock on Melvin's office door. He opened it with violence, the solid wood slamming against the wall. Melvin looked up, startled. Then understanding crashed across his face. "Who are you to me?" Edwin's voice was cold, not loud. Controlled fury. Melvin stood slowly. "Edwin, answer the question." "I'm your father." The words landed like blows. True, undeniable, devastating. "How long?" Edwin asked. "I found out the day after your interview." "And you hired me anyway?" "You earned that position." "Don't patronize me," Edwin's control shattered. "You hired me because I'm your son. Everything I thought I'd finally accomplished was a lie." "That's not. 16 interviews I failed. 16 times I thought I wasn't good enough. And you just... What? Felt guilty? Decided to give the son you abandoned a pity job?" "It wasn't pity." "Then what was it?" Melvin's face showed guilt, grief, no defense. "It was recognition. I saw myself in you. You saw your DNA. Not me. Not my work. Just biology." The office door opened. Mary rushed in, face pale, phone in hand. "Edwin, wait!" Edwin turned. The betrayal in his eyes stopped her cold. "You." His voice broke. "You've known my entire life. Every interview I failed. Every time I asked why my father didn't want me. You knew exactly where he was." "I was protecting you." "From what? The truth? A father? Or from being disappointed by him the way you were?" Mary's eyes filled. "Edwin, please. How many times did I ask about him? How many times did you lie?" "I never lied. I said he had important work." "You let me believe I wasn't important enough to keep." Edwin's voice rose. First time, raw. "You let me think there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't worth knowing." That's exactly what you did." 3 people in one room, a father, a mother, a son, the photograph still on Melvin's desk, proof none of them could deny. Edwin's rage wasn't loud, it was cold, precise. Each accusation landing exactly where it would hurt most. To Melvin, "You watched me fail for months and watched me break. Did you pity me? Did you feel superior? Building your empire while your son couldn't get an entry-level job?" "I didn't know." "Because you didn't look. You never looked." To Mary, "You let me fail. You watched me apologize for existing. You taught me to make myself small. Was that preparation? For a father who wouldn't make room?" "I was teaching you to survive. You were teaching me I didn't matter." Melvin tried to speak. Mary defended fiercely, maternally, but incomplete. Neither had answers that satisfied. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" Edwin asked. The devastating question. "Or was I always just a secret you were ashamed of?" "I'm ashamed of myself," Melvin answered. "Never of you. I don't believe you, and I don't believe anything I accomplished is real." "Edwin, you earned—" "Stop. Just stop." Edwin's hands shook. "You don't get to tell me what I earned. You don't get to rewrite this. I thought someone finally saw me, but you just saw yourself." 23 years of silence erupted between Mary and Melvin. "You took him from me," Melvin said, turning on Mary. "You weren't there to take. You never gave me the chance. I gave you 9 months of chances." Edwin slammed his hand on the desk. "Stop, both of you. I'm not a prize you fought over. I'm a person you both failed." Silence. Edwin pulled his badge from his pocket, set it on Melvin's desk. "I quit." "Edwin." Both parents spoke simultaneously. "I don't want your job. I don't want your guilt. I don't want either of you." He walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Mary's voice cracked. "Anywhere you're not." Edwin left the building, ignoring calls that started immediately. Mary and Melvin left standing in wreckage. Here's what you need to understand. Edwin isn't wrong. Mary isn't wrong. Melvin isn't wrong. This is what happens when good people make survival choices that collide decades later. There's no villain here, just wreckage. Margaret Chen appeared in Melvin's office 20 minutes later. "I assume he found the email," she said. No sympathy. Pure pragmatism. "You sent it." Melvin's voice was dead. "I did. You weren't going to tell him before the board meeting. I expedited the process. You destroyed him. I protected this company. Now you see what liabilities do. Step aside quietly. Melvin looked at her. Really looked. At the calculation. The coldness. The corporate efficiency that had once impressed him. Prepare for tomorrow's board meeting, he said quietly. I have an announcement. Margaret smiled. Victory. She had no idea what Melvin had actually decided. Edwin wasn't just angry. He was unraveling. And what he did next terrified Mary. He didn't go home, didn't answer his phone, just walked. Hours of walking through a city that suddenly felt foreign. Everyone he passed had families, histories, truths they probably knew. Edwin had lies, carefully constructed ones, 22 years of them. 3 days. Edwin disappeared for 3 days. Neither Mary nor Melvin could find him. Mary sat in her car outside Melvin's building for 2 hours, calling Edwin's phone every 10 minutes. Voicemail. Always voicemail. Melvin did the same from his office. 10 calls, 20, 50. Nothing. Neither of them knew that Edwin was sitting in the same cafe where they'd met, holding a resignation letter that would never be delivered. Because he'd decided something worse than quitting. He'd decided he didn't matter at all, that every accomplishment was tainted. Every skill was genetic luck. Every moment he'd felt seen was just a father recognizing his own reflection. Edwin stared at his coffee, watched it go cold, and felt something inside him hollow out completely. The board meeting was in 18 hours. What Melvin said there would shock everyone. Melvin had one chance to fix this, and it required destroying everything he'd built. But first someone had to find Edwin, before he disappeared completely, before the damage became permanent, before the son Melvin had just found became the son he'd lose forever. The truth was out. Violently. Publicly. In exactly the way they'd tried to prevent. And now Edwin was gone. Mary was breaking. Melvin was preparing to lose everything. The collision had happened. The wreckage was still falling. And tomorrow, in a boardroom 14 floors above the city, Melvin Stitch would make the choice he should have made 23 years ago. Even if Edwin never knew. Even if it was too late. He would finally choose right. Melvin walked into the board meeting at 9:00 a.m. with a single piece of paper. His resignation. Effective immediately. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. Leather chairs, mahogany table, power concentrated in one space, the room where he'd made 1,000 decisions, built an empire, changed industries. This would be his last. Melvin placed the resignation letter on the table. 1 page, 1 paragraph. No equivocation. The paper slid across polished wood with a whisper. I'm stepping down, he said, his voice steady for the first time in days. Margaret Chen's eyes widened. We didn't ask for this. I'm not asking for permission. The city sounds beyond the glass were muted, distant. The world continuing while Melvin's ended and began simultaneously. His hands weren't shaking. The decision was made. 23 years ago, I made a choice, Melvin began. I chose this company, this room, this vision of success, and I lost someone who mattered because I was too focused on mattering to the world. 5 days ago, a young man walked into an interview. Brilliant, uncertain, asking questions no one else thought to ask. I hired him because he was exceptional. Then I found out he was my son, who I didn't know existed. Who failed 16 interviews because he was taught to apologize for his intelligence, who grew up thinking his father didn't want him. I sat across from him in that conference room and watched him pause before speaking. Watched him apologize before disagreeing. Watched him hold his pen exactly the way I do. And I told myself it was talent recognition, instinct, the thing that made me good at building companies. But it was DNA. It was 22 years of choices I didn't get to make crashing through me all at once. You're asking me to choose between him and this company. You think it's complicated. It's the simplest decision I've ever made. I'm choosing him, not because of DNA, but because I finally understand what I should have understood at 35. You can build an empire and die alone in it, or you can build a family and die knowing you mattered to someone who actually knew you. I built this company from nothing. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what we created together. The jobs, the innovation, the legacy. But I missed my son's first words, his first steps, his first day of school, his graduation. 22 years of moments that happened without me because I was here, in rooms like this, making decisions that felt important. They were important, but they weren't enough. Edwin doesn't want my money. He doesn't want this position. He wants a father who shows up. And for the first time in my life, I'm going to show up. Not because it's easy, not because I've earned it, but because he deserves a father who finally understands what matters. I'm resigning. Effective today. Appoint an interim CEO. Protect the shareholders. Do what you do best. I'm going to do what I should have done 23 years ago. Choose love over legacy. Silence consumed the boardroom. Margaret found her voice first. You're making a mistake. I already made it, Melvin replied. I'm fixing it. An older board member, Robert Chen, stood. I respect that. Another voice. The press will destroy us. Melvin met their eyes. Each one. Then destroy me. Leave my son alone. Margaret's face was fury barely contained. You're destroying everything you built. No, I'm finally building what matters. He walked out. Didn't look back. Melvin walked out of that building for the last time as CEO. What he became next mattered more. 3 miles away, Edwin finally answered Mary's call. He'd been sitting in a park for 2 hours. Phone buzzing relentlessly, both parents calling. Alternating. Desperate. Hello? His voice was hollow. Mary's voice, raw from crying. Edwin, thank God. I don't know how to forgive you. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to let me explain. Silence. Then, I'm listening. Mary pulled her car over. Couldn't drive and say this. Couldn't navigate traffic while confessing 23 years. I kept you from him because I thought he'd disappoint you. I was wrong. But I'd do anything again to protect you. You didn't protect me. You lied to me. I know. Every night I asked about him. Every time I failed and wondered if having a father would have made me stronger. I needed him. Mary's voice broke. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Why didn't you just tell me? Because I was protecting myself too. From the possibility that he'd reject you the way he rejected me. From watching you learn what I learned, that you can love someone who loves their ambition more. Edwin was quiet, processing, not forgiving, but beginning to understand. He resigned, Edwin said finally. I heard. It's all over the company message boards. He what? This morning. Walked into the board meeting and quit. For me. Mary's hands gripped the steering wheel. Oh. Is that supposed to fix it? No, but maybe it's a start. Melvin's phone rang as he stood on the sidewalk outside Stitch Global. Former CEO, former empire builder, current father trying to figure out how to be one. Edwin's number. Melvin answered with shaking hands. Edwin, I heard what you did. News was spreading fast. Company gossip. Press releases being drafted. The business world processing his resignation. Can I see you? Melvin asked. Edwin hesitated, long enough that Melvin's heart stopped. I don't know if I'm ready. I'll wait. However long it takes. More silence. Then, why did you resign? Because I already lost 22 years. I won't lose the rest. You could have fought them, kept your position, and taught you that power matters more than people. I've spent my life teaching the wrong lessons. I'm done. Edwin's breath caught, audible through the phone. Coffee tomorrow? Edwin asked, voice small, uncertain. Just coffee. Melvin's hands shook with hope. I'll be there. The cafe on 5th, 9 a.m. I'll be early. The line disconnected, and Melvin stood on the street outside the building he'd created. No longer CEO, no longer empire builder. Just a man who'd finally made the right choice. His phone buzzed again. Text from Edwin. Don't expect forgiveness. Just show up. Melvin's response, fingers trembling. I will. Every day. For as long as you let me. The board found out. Melvin chose Edwin. The loop that had been building since Margaret discovered the truth was finally resolved. Melvin resigned to protect his son. The decision that had cost him everything he'd built and given him the only chance at what mattered. The meeting that happened 1 week later would begin the healing. Slowly. Painfully. Really. Because healing wasn't immediate. Wasn't clean. Wasn't Hollywood. It was coffee at 9 a.m. with long silences. Conversations that hurt. Apologies that fell short. Moments of connection followed by moments of doubt. Edwin wasn't ready to forgive, but he was ready for something else. To see if the man who'd resigned his empire could show up for coffee. Could be present. Could choose him not once in a dramatic gesture, but daily, quietly, consistently. The resolution didn't happen in a day. It happened in a series of small moments. That moment, when Melvin walked away from everything he'd built. I've watched this story 100 times in different forms, and it always comes down to the same question. What are you protecting when you protect your pride? If this story is making you think about someone you need to reach out to, someone you've kept at a distance because vulnerability feels like weakness, maybe this is your sign. Share this video with them. Or just share it because you understand what Melvin finally learned. It's never too late to choose right. Mary drove to that park, found Edwin sitting on a bench, staring at his phone. She sat beside him, didn't speak, just present. He quit, Edwin said. I heard. Is that supposed to change things? I don't know, but it's more than he did for me. Edwin looked at his mother, really looked, at the years in her face, the sacrifices in her posture, the weight she'd carried alone. I'm still angry at you. I know. But I understand why you did it. Mary's eyes filled. That's more than I deserve. Maybe. But you're all I've had for 22 years. I can't lose you too. She took his hand. He let her. We're going to figure this out, Mary said. The three of us. Somehow. I don't know if I can forgive either of you. Then we'll start with coffee. And see what comes next. The climax had passed. The choice was made. The empire was abandoned, and tomorrow, at a cafe on 5th Street, 3 people would begin the slow, painful work of becoming what they should have been all along. A family. Not perfect, not healed, but present. Finally, devastatingly, hopefully present. The coffee shop where it started had become their place, every Sunday. 9 o'clock a.m. A father learning his son. A son learning his father. 18 months after the resignation. After the confrontation. After everything broke and slowly, painfully started rebuilding. The coffee shop noise was familiar now. Comfortable. The soundtrack to their healing. Melvin arrived first today. Old habit. Ordered 2 coffees. Black for himself. Light cream for Edwin. He'd learned that in month 3. Edwin walked in at 9:03, still slightly late. Some patterns never changed. But his posture had. Straighter. Certain. The apologetic hunch was gone. Traffic, Edwin said, sliding into the chair across from his father. It's Sunday. There's no traffic. Overslept. Melvin's laugh was newer. Lighter. The sound of a man who'd stopped carrying an empire on his shoulders. I got the promotion, Edwin said. No preamble. Just news between father and son. You earned it. No help from me. Actually, I called you for advice last week. That counts as help. Melvin's expression softened. Then I'm honored you asked. They sipped coffee. Comfortable silence between them now, instead of painful ones. It still feels strange, having you here, Edwin admitted. Strange bad or strange different? Edwin considered. Different, but good different. It hadn't happened fast. The first 6 months were polite, careful, painful. Weekly coffee where conversations lasted 20 minutes before running out of safe topics. Edwin's anger surfaced repeatedly, in accusations delivered calmly, in silences that said everything. In moments when he'd almost cancel, almost walk away, almost decide this wasn't worth the effort. Melvin took it, showed up anyway. Every Sunday. Every phone call Edwin would accept. Every moment his son would let him. Mary and Melvin learned to co-parent a grown son. Awkward at first. They hadn't spoken in 23 years. Now they were coordinating holidays and navigating a relationship neither of them had prepared for. Not romance. That ship had sailed and sunk decades ago. But something like friendship, built on shared investment in the person they'd both loved wrong and were trying to love right. The breakthrough came in month 9. Edwin invited Melvin to career day at a local high school where Edwin volunteered. "Talk about resilience and mistakes," Edwin had said. Testing. Seeing if his father was willing to be vulnerable publicly. Melvin showed up, stood in front of 200 teenagers, and said the words that changed everything. "I built an empire and lost my family. Don't be like me." He talked about ambition without balance, success without connection. The corner office that felt emptier every year, the son he didn't meet until that son was 22 and both of them had already lost decades. "Your parents probably annoy you," Melvin said to the students. "Mine did too, but they're there. They show up. Don't wait until you're 50 to realize that mattered." Edwin watched from the back of the auditorium, seeing his father's regret as real. Not performed, not damage control, just honest. After, they stood in the parking lot. Awkward. Always awkward. "Thank you for coming," Edwin said. Melvin nodded, turned to leave. "Wait." Edwin stepped forward. Brief, awkward, but genuine. The hug lasted 3 seconds, changed everything. Edwin's new job was at an independent firm, nothing connected to Stitch Global, nothing that carried his father's influence. He'd earned the interview through connections he'd made himself, aced it because he'd finally learned to stop apologizing for being smart. Senior analyst now, team lead, building expertise and reputation that belonged entirely to him. The rejection emails still came sometimes. He'd applied for a position last month that went to someone else. The familiar sting, the old voices saying he wasn't enough. But now when Edwin closed his laptop, he didn't feel invisible, because someone finally saw him. And sometimes, being seen by the right person, even late, changes everything. Melvin's life had transformed in ways he hadn't expected. Part-time consultant, advising startups, teaching them what he'd learned the hard way about balancing ambition with humanity. University lecturer 3 days a week. Business ethics. He taught students that success without connection was just expensive loneliness. The rest of his time? Present. Finally, devastatingly present. "I spent 23 years building something impressive," Melvin said during one Sunday coffee. "It took 5 days to realize it meant nothing without someone to build it for. I'm not the same man. I don't want to be. Edwin didn't need a CEO. He needed a father. I'm learning how to be that, badly sometimes. But I'm showing up. Every Sunday. Every phone call. Every moment he'll let me." Mary had retired. Finally. She wrote in the mornings. Memoir. Not for publication necessarily. Just for herself. For Edwin. For any grandchild who might wonder someday how their family became this strange, healing thing. "I don't regret raising him alone," she wrote one morning. "I regret making him feel like he wasn't enough reason for his father to stay. Maybe I should have tried harder to tell Melvin. Maybe Melvin should have paid attention. We'll never know now. But what I do know, my son turned out extraordinary, not despite the secrets. Maybe because he learned to build his own worth. That's what I tell myself on the hard days." She joined them for dinner once a month. The 3 of them. Family redefined. The first dinner had been excruciating. 45 minutes of stilted conversation and food no one tasted. By month 18, it was easier. Still awkward. But real. Melvin arrived late to the last one. "Traffic," he said. You were always terrible at excuses, Mary replied. And you were always terrible at letting me get away with them. They smiled. Not romance, but something like friendship forged through shared, complicated history. The dinner table had mismatched plates, home-cooked food, the comfortable chaos of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Edwin watched his parents. Not together. Never that. But present. Trying. Building something neither of them knew how to name. Mary's face watching them had changed. Years of weightlifting, the burden of secrets finally set down. Edwin brought his fiancée to Sunday coffee in month 16. She's nervous, Edwin warned Melvin beforehand. Meeting you feels important to her. Melvin understood. He'd only recently become important to Edwin. The weight of that wasn't lost on him. He's good at seeing people, Edwin reassured her in the car. Inside, Melvin asked thoughtful questions. Not interrogation, genuine curiosity. He listened more than he spoke, saw what Edwin loved in her, intelligence, kindness, the way she didn't diminish herself. After she left to take a call, Melvin smiled. She's wonderful. Yeah, she is. You chose well. Edwin nodded. I learned from watching Mom. She chose herself when someone couldn't choose her. Melvin went quiet. The compliment and criticism wound together. She taught you better than I could have. But you're teaching me now. The moment expanded. Forgiveness still incomplete. But connection finally real. I don't know if I've forgiven them. Both of them, Edwin told his fiancée later. Some days I'm still angry that they chose for me instead of with me. But I'm learning that people make survival decisions that look like betrayals. Mom thought she was protecting me. Dad thought he was, I don't know, building something that mattered. They were both wrong and both right. And I get to decide what happens next. So I'm choosing this. Slowly. Carefully. But I'm choosing it. Where they were now. Edwin, senior analyst at independent firm. Engaged. Building life on his terms. Sunday coffee with his father. Monthly dinners with both parents. Learning that family was messy and imperfect and worth showing up for. Melvin. Part-time consultant. University lecturer. Building relationship with son one coffee at a time. Learning that presence mattered more than presents. That showing up was the work. Mary. Retired. Writing. Watching her son and his father become something she couldn't have predicted. Proud grandmother-to-be. Finally, at peace. The three of them. Not a perfect family, but a real one. Mary sat at her kitchen table one Sunday morning, writing chapter 17 of her memoir. A photograph sat beside her laptop. The three of them at Edwin's engagement party. Edwin in the middle, Mary on one side, Melvin on the other. Not touching, but together. Messy. Real. Family. She studied Edwin's face in the photo. The confidence, the certainty, the young man who'd survived being invisible and learned to make himself seen. Some stories aren't about success. They're about being found after a lifetime of being overlooked. Edwin never did return to Stish Global, but the Sunday coffees continued. Because some legacies aren't built in boardrooms. They're built in the small, consistent choice to show up. Again and again. Until family stops being a wound and becomes a witness to who you're becoming. If this story found you today, I don't think that's an accident. So many of us carry versions of these wounds, the parent who wasn't there, the choice we made for survival that cost us connection, the moment we realized we'd been seen all along but couldn't accept it. This community exists because these stories matter. Because you matter. Subscribe if you want more stories about women who protected, men who learned too late, and families that found each other anyway. And comment below. What's one thing Edwin's journey taught you? Because I promise you, someone else needs to hear it. There are thousands of us here, learning together that being seen, really seen, can happen at any age. It's never too late to choose right.